That is Alyssa Tejas reporting. We have not been able to chat with Lubbock Congressman Jody Arrington in a while, so let's do that from the office in D.C. My friend, business owners here say they appreciate the federal aid money. They appreciate being able to reopen, but a lot just aren't getting the customers in that they need, so they're still struggling. Will more federal money be coming to help them?
Well, we've got to make sure that the tens of billions of dollars remaining of the trillions that we spend in aid work its way through the system. Where we have gaps, I'm certainly willing to address that in a temporary and targeted way. I think the biggest challenge, Brian, is that 75% of the 40 million people on unemployment are getting paid more to be on unemployment than to return to work. So we have to remove barriers and disincentives to work. That's hurting our local employers. And we need to keep the economy turned on and open and find ways to accelerate that. But certainly liquidity and that temporary assistance is part of it. And as this plays out, where there are gaps, we're certainly committed to providing that support.
And I know you've been looking for a bipartisan plan as well to start to address the debt that's piling up because of these aid packages. How is that going? How do you think that will work once it finally gets through all the channels?
Oh, you bet. Listen, this is my passion because I think it's the greatest long-term threat for the next generation of Americans. And we will manage through this public health crisis. We'll stave off a long-term recession or depression. But if we ever enter into a sovereign debt crisis, you can't bail yourself out of it. And we're just at such a tenuous and fragile situation at $26 trillion in debt. It's the highest debt per GDP we've ever been in, surpassing World War II. So the idea is, and we have 30 Democrats and 30 Republicans, we've led an effort on both sides of the aisle with our leadership to say, we've got to put measures in place in the next COVID-related legislation that force Congress to deal with the debt, rein in the spending, and make sure that we can start bringing the debt to GDP on a glide slope down to something that's manageable and responsible. So that's ongoing. I'm meeting with our leadership on the Republican side. Just had a meeting with my colleagues on the Democrat side. They're doing the same thing, and I'm optimistic that we'll get something in the final analysis.
If the crisis continues, though, and you're trying to hit budgetary debt to GDP targets along the way with this, could that mean that programs like, say, Medicare, maybe infrastructure projects could be in trouble?
Well, I can tell you that the trillions of dollars, almost $4 trillion that we will have spent, deficit spending, the largest ever, has exacerbated the unsustainable path and the insolvency of very important safety nets for seniors like Social Security and Medicare. So a lot of this is trying to look at those long-term liabilities and make sure that those programs are solvent and that safety net is there for seniors while we're trying to adjust our spending and do the things that are necessary to get that debt to GDP, again, at a responsible level. So it's all the above. And the problem is Congress doesn't respond to things until there's a crisis. Well, you can't wait for a sovereign debt crisis because when things start to implode there, we're going to push off this $26 trillion in debt, which is a deferred tax on our children. They'll end up picking up the pieces. They'll have a terrible economy, high interest rate, high unemployment, and taxes that we can't even fathom. That's what's going to happen if we don't do something. So all of this is in play. Looking at long-term liabilities, having a fiscal State of the Union every year. This is part of the letter we wrote to the leadership. And thirdly, having a debt to GDP target with a glide slope going the right direction. Those are the recommendations. And I'm hopeful we'll get one, if not all three of them, because they're bipartisan and they're the right thing to do.
I mentioned infrastructure. You know, we talked last week on the show about the Ports to Plains highway legislation finally coming to fruition. Can you explain to folks why this legislation federally is necessary to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, well, the Ports to Plains initiative to have a federal highway system running through West Texas up through the Panhandle and the backbone of the country, obviously critical to moving the food, fuel, and fiber product throughout the nation and at ports that will then ship it throughout the world to our international markets. For Texas, it's also taking congestion off of I-35. It's a great ROI. All the feasibility studies have great promise and great results. But we have to have a designated highway, federal highway. So this Ports to Plains amendment that we put in place, and I'm confident we're going to get it out of this first piece of the infrastructure process, is going to designate from Laredo, Texas, all the way up through the Panhandle, a federal highway, 4-lane highway, which would be huge for the economies of these local rural communities in West Texas. But again, first we got to get the federal designation, then you compete for resources, and until you get that designation, you're on the outside looking in.
Perfect. You know, before I let you go, I know there have been calls for lawmakers to step in and provide some help with police brutality issues in many parts of the country following the death of George Floyd. I know it's been a big issue for everyone up there. Is that something for Congress to take up, or is this a better state or local issue for those folks to try to deal with in their own jurisdictions?
Brian, you framed it well. That's an easy answer for me. First of all, let me say the vast majority of our law enforcement are honorable men and women.
Oh, yeah.
They serve with integrity and dignity and bravery. And it's just a small percentage of bad actors that spoil it for everybody else. And the first line of defense against a culture of corruption or incidences of abuse of power is the local level. Policing is a state and local issue, not a federal responsibility. Now, there are things that we can do with respect to transparency, and there are things we can do to partner with local and state government officials to make sure that when there are bad actors identified, we remove them from the system and they can't shuffle around from agency to agency and continue to perpetrate their abuse on people. So I'm a limited touch from the federal side on policing. Nancy Pelosi's bill that just passed was a federal takeover, no surprise, of policing. And if you look at the bill and what it bans and what it mandates, it will hog-tie our law enforcement to the point that they can't do their job, number one. Number two, will jeopardize their life and safety, and will open up agencies all around the country to frivolous lawsuits. So I can say confidently, it will hurt, not just policing, it will hurt our security in communities like Lubbock and all across the country. So this is one that we need accountability at the local level, and we need to get rid of the bad actors. We do that, we'll solve 99% of the problems.
All right, Lubbock Congressman Jody Arrington, always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. Be safe, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, Brian.